I was sitting in a high-end cafe in Ginza last Tuesday afternoon, and the place was packed, not with salarymen or young influencers, but with retirees. At the table next to me, a group of men in their 70s were laughing over 1,500 yen coffees, their wrists sporting vintage Rolexes and their conversation flowing with the easy confidence of people who haven't had a financial worry in decades. They were discussing their next golf trip to Hokkaido with the kind of giddy excitement you usually see in teenagers. To an outsider, it looked like the picture-perfect vision of a successful society caring for its elders. But then I looked through the plate glass window. A delivery driver on a rusted scooter had just pulled up, his shoulders slumped under a heavy thermal bag. He looked about 24, his face pale and etched with a specific kind of permanent exhaustion. He was checking his phone frantically, likely calculating if this single delivery would even cover his lunch. The contrast was jarring, but what really struck me wasn't just the visible wealth gap. It was the invisible wall between them. When I struck up a casual conversation with one of the gentlemen at the cafe about the tough luck of the younger generation, his expression didn't soften into sympathy. Instead, he gave me this slightly attached, almost puzzled look. "The young people today," he said, waving a hand dismissively toward the window. "They just don't have the spirit we had. They don't take risks. They don't build anything." It was a fascinating, almost haunting perspective. Here was a man sitting on a mountain of bubble era, capital part of the 60% of Japan's total wealth held by those over 60, completely unaware that the very hoard he was sitting on was the reason that kid on the scooter couldn't afford to take a risk if he wanted to. He saw his wealth as a reward for spirit, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the economic ladder he climbed was pulled up behind him decades ago. It made me wonder, in a country where the money is literally waiting for its owners to pass away before it can circulate, is Japan's silver democracy actually a golden cage for its future?
Wow. I mean, that scene you just painted, it's the perfect snapshot for this deep dive.
Right. It was so stark.
It really is, because, when we talk about economics, it's so easy to get lost in GDP charts and interest rates and
all the abstract numbers.
Exactly. Abstract percentages. But that scene in Ginza, that is the physical manifestation of a structural fracture that's been widening for 30 years.
Yeah. And we're not just talking about a wealth gap in the way people usually think about it.
Not at all. This isn't the standard rich versus poor dynamic you see everywhere. You called it a time gap, and that's perfect. We are literally seeing how a specific economic history and a really rigid set of policies have frozen a nation's resources in time.
It really felt like I was looking at two different planets that just happened to occupy the same zip code. And to get to the bottom of this, to really understand why that young driver is stuck on the outside looking in, we have pulled together a massive stack of research.
Sure.
I mean, we are not just speculating today.
No, we've got the receipts.
We do. We've got papers from the Social Science Japan Journal, some really heavy-hitting reports from Columbia Business School, deep investigative pieces from the New York Times, and some really granular labor analysis from Japanese academic circles.
And when you start to overlay all these sources, they stop looking like separate reports. They start to form a single, coherent map.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a map of two Japans. One Japan is, living in the afterglow of the bubble era's lifetime promise. That's your guy with the vintage Rolex.
Right.
And the other Japan is trapped in this cycle of stagnation that seems almost impossible to break out of.
And I want to be really clear about the mission here for you listening. This isn't just about money sitting in a bank account. This is about the death of risk. It's about the suffocation of innovation. And ultimately, if you follow the demographic lines, it's about a slow-motion national collapse.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. So We're going to break this down by looking at what we're calling the three walls. These are the invisible barriers blocking that delivery driver I saw from ever joining the guys inside the cafe. It's like the wall of work, the wall of money, and the wall of time.
3 walls, and each one is higher than the last. Let's start with the foundation, the wall of work.
Okay, so I want to take you away from Ginza for a moment and into a much smaller, quieter space. I was reading through some forum posts from Tokyo, and I came across this story that, it just perfectly illustrates this invisible wall between the generations.
Mm-hmm.
You have to imagine this small apartment, maybe in Sujinami. And there's Kenta. He's a 31-year-old Heiken, a dispatch worker, and he's having a meal with his dad, Hiroshi.
Okay.
Now, Hiroshi is a retired salaryman. He spent 40 years under this warm umbrella of lifetime employment. His path was predictable, solid. He looks at Kenta, who is juggling 3 different irregular contracts, no bonuses, no insurance, and he tells him he just needs to work harder to get promoted.
Oof. He just doesn't get it.
He doesn't get it at all. Because Kenta knows that promotion track literally doesn't exist for people like him. He's part of the lost generation, kept in this state of permanent professional adolescence.
Really?
Really, just to protect the high wages and benefits of his father's generation.
So that safety net that Hiroshi enjoyed his whole life
is paid for by his son's precarity. When I read Kenta's words online, you could just feel this quiet resignation. And it's easy to judge Hiroshi for being blind, but you have to realize he's a product of a golden era he thinks still exists. He's not being cruel. He's just living in a ghost of a system.
And that tension at the dinner table, that complete disconnect between Kenta and Hiroshi, is the human face of what economists call labor market dualism. But to understand why Kenta is stuck and why his dad can't see it, we have to go back to when the trap was first set. We have to talk about the employment ice age.
The ice age. That's what, roughly 1993 to 2004,
Yeah.
right after the bubble burst?
Precisely. The economy just flatlines. Asset prices collapse. And companies, they need to cut costs, and they need to do it desperately. Now, in a flexible labor market like the U.S., you'd see layoffs across the board.
Right. Everyone's at risk.
Everyone's at risk. But in Japan, because of these incredibly strong labor protections and this cultural mandate of lifetime employment for existing workers, people like Hiroshi companies couldn't fire the older staff. It was legally and socially just impossible.
So instead of letting go of the expensive older workers,
They just stopped hiring new ones.
they just slammed the door shut on the new graduates. So the youth bore the entire brunt of the recession.
The entire thing. And the research on this is just devastating. We looked at a study by Ayako Kondo in the Social Science Japan Journal, which talks about these scarring effects.
The scarring effects.
Yeah, the data shows that the cohorts of students who enter the job market during these recessions suffer persistent negative effects on their earnings and employment that last for decades. It's not just a bad start, it's a permanent handicap.
So if you miss the boat at 22 in Japan,
Because of that rigid recruitment structure, the boat very rarely comes back for you.
that's the definition of a lost generation.
Yeah.
But Kenta isn't just unemployed. He's working. He's just working differently. He's on a different track.
And that is the dual structure, the core of the problem. You have your regular workers, the seishin, these are the Hiroshis. They've got lifetime employment, big bonuses, social insurance, training. They are almost impossible to fire.
The insiders.
The insiders.
Yeah.
Then you have the non-regular workers like Kenta. This includes heiken or dispatch workers, part-timers. They get low pay, precarious contracts, and almost never any bonuses.
And the sources say this non-regular group it's huge now, isn't it?
It is nearly 40% of the entire workforce. Just think about that for a second. 40% of the working population is functionally separate from the corporate core.
Right.
And the scary part is the lack of mobility. I mean, in a lot of Western countries, you might do temp work for a while and then, get hired full time.
Right. It's a foot in the door.
In Japan, once you are on that non-regular track, it is incredibly difficult to switch to the regular track. It functions as a caste system. Kenta can work harder than anyone else in that office, but because his contract says dispatch, he is literally invisible to the promotion mechanism.
That is terrifying. It's like being branded at entry level. But here is where it gets really mechanically interesting. Why are the older workers protected so fiercely? Why is that gap so wide? I was reading this fascinating paper by Nishimura in Japan Labor Issues about the wage curve.
Yes, this is absolutely key to the puzzle. In many economies, you're paid based on the job you do, right? Pay for performance. If a 25-year-old and a 55-year-old do the same coding job, their pay is roughly comparable based on their output.
Sure. Makes sense.
But in Japan, the traditional model is pay for livelihood, or nenko juretsu. The whole idea is that your wages have to rise with your age to support a family, pay for a mortgage, your kids' education.
So your salary isn't necessarily about how good you are at your job, but about how old you are. It's a social subsidy that's baked right into the corporate payroll.
Broadly speaking, yes. The data is shocking. It shows that in Japan, wages for someone with 30-plus years of service are about 180% of an entry-level worker's wage.
180%.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Europe, that same figure is usually around 120, maybe 130%. The curve in Japan is incredibly steep.
So let's play this out. If I'm a company owner, a 55-year-old worker costs me nearly double what a 25-year-old costs me. But I can't fire the 55-year-old because I have to protect his livelihood.
Correct. So you're trapped. You can't afford to hire the 25-year-old at a decent regular rate because your entire budget is being eaten up by your senior staff.
So the older generation's high wages are essentially subsidized by
the younger generation's low wages and total lack of security. Kenta is poor specifically because Hiroshi is comfortable.
That puts a whole new spin on the lazy youth narrative from the guy in the cafe. It's not that they don't want to work. It's that the system literally can't afford to let them into the club.
It can't.
And this leads us directly to the second wall. Because if Kenta can't get a job, the natural thing to say is, well, maybe he should start a business, right? Be an entrepreneur. Well, that's where you run smack into the wall of money.
Or, as we might call it, the capital liquidity crisis.
Right. I saw a short documentary clip the other day about Tansu Yoken, the wardrobe savings of Japan's elderly. It was following this woman, Mrs. Watanabe. She's in her late 70s, and she keeps nearly 30 million yen in a low-interest postal savings account.
Okay.
And to her, this isn't just money. It's her only shield, her only protection against an uncertain future in a country where the social safety net feels like it's fraying.
It's security.
It's pure security.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just a few miles away in some cramped co-working space, there's a brilliant young software engineer named Daichi. And he is shutting down his robotics startup, not because his tech was bad. He failed because he couldn't find a single angel investor willing to take a risk on him.
And the capital he needed
is sitting in Mrs. Watanabe's bank account. It's frozen in time, completely bypassed by a financial system that prioritizes the security of the elderly over the innovation of the youth. It's a capital black hole.
Capital black hole is a very, very appropriate term. The sources we have are pretty clear on this. They indicate that over 60% of Japan's personal financial assets are held by people over the age of 60.
60%. That is a staggering amount of wealth concentrated in one demographic. That means the majority of the nation's buying power and investment power is in the hands of retirees.
It is. And the crucial factor isn't just that they hold it, but how they hold it. You mentioned Mrs. Watanabe's postal savings account. Data from the Investment Company Institute and other financial analyses, it shows this massive risk aversion.
They're scared to invest.
Terrified. Japanese households hold roughly 50%, 50, of their assets in cash and deposits.
50%. And what's that compared to, say, the U.S.?
In the U.S., it's closer to 13%. 1-3. In the U.S., grandma's money is likely in a mutual fund or the stock market. You know, it's out there fueling companies. In Japan, it's stagnant.
So half the country's private wealth is just sitting there. It's not in the stock market. It's not in venture capital. It's just cash.
Well, it's in banks. And this creates a completely closed loop. It's fascinating. Mrs. Watanabe deposits her cash in the bank.
Okay.
The bank, which is lacking demand from a shrinking domestic business sector, has nowhere to lend it. So it buys Japanese government bonds.
Right. Fair.
The safest. The government then uses that money to pay for pensions and Social Security. And who receives those pensions?
Mrs. Watanabe.
Mrs. Watanabe.
It's a perfect circle. The money goes from the elderly to the bank to the government and right back to the elderly. It completely bypasses the private sector. It bypasses Daichi and his robotics startup entirely.
Precisely. And this is why Japan ranks dead last in the OECD for new enterprise entry rates. We saw that in the Knowledge at Wharton source. The money exists. I mean, Japan is a wealthy nation, but it is not accessible to the people who would use it to innovate.
And it's not just about the access to cash, is it? It's also about the culture of funding. The sources mention that domestic venture capitalists in Japan are often described as, risk-averse salarymen.
That's a critical point. In Silicon Valley, a lot of VCs are former entrepreneurs themselves. They understand that failure is part of the process.
They've been there.
They've been there. In Japan, many VC firms are just subsidiaries of big banks or insurance companies.
Yeah.
They're staffed by employees who are terrified of losing money, so they often demand personal collateral from the founder.
Personal collateral. So if the company goes under, Daichi loses his house.
Not just his house. In many cases, the bankruptcy laws are so severe that they make the founder and their family liable for the debts. It can destroy lives.
So the rational choice for Daichi is not to start the company in the first place.
Of course not. The risk-reward ratio is completely and utterly broken.
And if you do try to break the mold, if you do try to act like a Silicon Valley disruptor, society just slaps you down.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the story of Takafumi Hori. This was in the New York Times source.
Ah, yes. Live Door. A classic.
He was the anti-establishment icon, right?
Yeah.
Young, brash, an IT tycoon. He'd wear T-shirts into boardrooms where everyone else was in a dope suit. He launched hostile takeovers, which is just It's not done in polite Japanese business society. He was a symbol that things could change.
Until they didn't.
Right. He was arrested for securities fraud. Now, we're not here to relitigate his case. He did serve time. But the sources point out something fascinating about the public reaction. The media and the establishment didn't just attack him for the alleged crime. They attacked him for rocking the boat, for being different, for being loud.
The message sent to the youth was crystal clear. Don't challenge the status quo. Stay in your lane. And this just reinforces that Galapagos syndrome markets that are totally isolated from the rest of the world.
Yeah, if you're a young person and you watch Hori get taken down like that, you go right back to trying to find a safe, regular job. You don't try to be the next Hori.
No way.
So we have a wall blocking work and a wall locking away all the money. But there is one more wall, and this one might be the hardest to climb because you just can't fight physics. Let's talk about the wall of time.
This brings us right to the intersection of demographics and inheritance, the final piece of the puzzle.
It really is. I heard this poignant account from a man named Takashi, which just perfectly highlights this inheritance trap in modern Japan. So Takashi just inherited his family's estate in Osaka. He is 63 years old.
Okay, so he's already at retirement age himself.
Exactly. He told the interviewer that when he was 24, he had this vision to start an architectural firm. It would combine traditional Japanese aesthetics with modern, sustainable materials. He had the talent, the drive, but he had zero capital. He asked his father for a loan. But his father, who was then in his 50s and terrified of the post-bubble volatility, refused to part with a single yen. He told him, waiting is a virtue.
Wow.
Now, 4 decades later, the money has finally arrived. Takashi looked at his bank balance and just sighed. He said, what am I supposed to do with this now? Buy a better hospital bed. The peak of his creative energy, his risk-taking appetite, it's long gone.
The season for planting has already passed.
That's it, exactly. By the time the younger generation gets the seed money for their lives, it's too late. We talk about inheritance as a gift, but in a society where people live to be 90 or 100, it's just a postscript to a life that could have been.
Takashi's story is the perfect example of asset gerontocracy. The capital arrives way too late to be productive. When wealth is transferred at age 60 or 65, the person receiving it is thinking about their own retirement, not about starting a business.
Right.
But this wall of time, it also applies to politics. We absolutely have to discuss the concept of silver democracy.
Silver democracy. I assume that means basically rule by the old.
Essentially. The voting bloc in Japan is overwhelmingly elderly. So politicians, it doesn't matter what party they're in, they know that to get elected, they have to cater to the interests of retirees. It's just a numbers game.
Which means protecting pensions and health care above all else.
Correct. And look, while those things are important, it creates a zero-sum game with the national budget. Spending focuses heavily on the elderly, while things like education, childcare, support for young families, they're chronically underfunded.
And the debt from all this is piling up.
Piling up is an understatement. The Columbia Business School report we looked at highlights the fiscal reality. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio is nearly 250%.
250%. That's a staggering number.
It is the highest in the developed world. Basically, the youth are inheriting a massive mortgage on a house they didn't build and will never own. They're being asked to pay higher taxes and higher Social Security premiums to support a system that likely won't even exist for them by the time they retire.
And this financial pressure, it just bleeds into their personal lives. It's not just about starting a business. It's about love and family.
Absolutely. The correlation is stark. The Columbia data shows that 42% of young singles cite a lack of funds as the main barrier to getting married.
42%.
No.
And if you don't get married in Japan, you generally don't have kids.
Exactly. Culturally, out-of-wedlock births are still very rare. So this economic insecurity leads directly to fewer marriages, which leads to a fertility rate that has dropped to 1.20.
Way below replacement level.
Far below. And for women, the wall is even higher. We saw data about the choice they have to face.
It's a brutal choice.
It is. Because of that rigid labor culture we talked about earlier, the long hours, the lack of flexibility, women are often forced to choose between a career as a regular employee or having a family. If they choose family, they often drop out of the regular workforce and can only return later as non-regular workers with low pay and no security.
So it's a massive loss of talent and productivity for the whole country.
Huge.
So the cycle just feeds on itself. The economic insecurity leads to a low birth rate.
Which means fewer workers in the next generation.
Which means a higher tax burden on the remaining few to pay for the growing number of elderly.
which creates even more insecurity. It's a vicious downward spiral.
And for the most talented, the most ambitious, the ones who just refuse to accept this, there's an exit option.
The brain drain. It's a very real thing. The NYT source mentioned an auto engineer, Kenichi Hori. No relation to the Livedoor guy, but he was brilliant.
What was his story?
He was doing advanced design work on biofuels, really cutting-edge stuff, but he was a contract worker, irregular. He was making half the pay of the older guys in his department and had zero job security. He just looked at his future in Japan and saw a dead end.
So what did he do?
He moved to Taiwan.
And in Taiwan, I bet they were happy to have him.
They told him he had a perfect resume. Japan's loss was Taiwan's gain. And this is happening more and more. Talented engineers, researchers, creators, they're realizing that if their own country won't bet on them, another country will.
It must create this pervasive sense of resignation. The sources mention low life satisfaction scores among Japanese youth compared to other developed nations. It's not an angry protest, it's just quiet giving up.
It is a perfectly rational response to structural immobility. If the game is rigged, why would you play?
So we started this whole deep dive with that image of the wealthy retiree in a Ginza cafe complaining about the lack of spirit in young people. But actually looking at all the sources, the wall of work, the wall of money, the wall of time, we see it's not a lack of spirit at all.
No.
It's a lack of oxygen.
That is the perfect analogy. The lost decades weren't just about GDP flatlining on a chart. They were about a society deciding, whether consciously or not, to protect the assets and the comfort of the past at the direct expense of the future. The capital from the bubble era is still there. It's immense, it's powerful, but it's locked away in a golden cage.
And, Japan is often seen as this unique case, an outlier. But as other developed nations continue to age, from Europe to other parts of Asia, looking at Japan isn't just looking at history. It might be like looking in the mirror. If a society refuses to pass the torch and the capital until the flame has already gone out, the darkness finally catches up.